Not a Republican versus...
We've had J. Christian Adams on the program before, but now he's written a book and put some of this important information in a book for history's sake. He's written the book called Injustice, Exposing the Racial Agenda of the Obama Justice Department. He is the whistleblower that told us all about how the Obama Justice Department ignored the Black Panthers' outrage in the election of 2008. J. Christian Adams, former Justice Department attorney and whistleblower, and now author. Welcome back, sir. How are you?
Thank you. I'm very good. Thank you for having me.
We also really appreciate the fact that in the middle of that firestorm in your congressional testimony, when you were being badly maligned by folks in the Justice Department on the subject of so many attacks, you took some time to share an important part of the story with us, so we appreciate our history as well, and congrats on the book.
Thank you very much. It's really fun to actually write something about what's going on inside the Justice Department.
What is the racial agenda of the Obama Justice Department?
Well, not only is that the subtitle of the book, but it's a description of what's happening. This particular Justice Department has taken an approach toward law enforcement that uses race as a sort of defining method and an ultimate goal. For example, consider New York City and Dayton, Ohio. They have attempted to require those cities, to hire firefighters and police officers who actually fail the entrance exams, who get Fs, because those are minorities. They're doing this sort of thing around the country in a variety of ways where race is the criteria being used to affect election law, employment law, civil rights laws generally, and it's not a very good thing.
Which is why I'm glad you wrote this book, and it is one of how many issues that are an absolute outrage, and that seem to be partly because of Fast and Furious getting some traction finally on what's going on there. So if you would, Jay, would you take us through the other tidbit in your book that's a bit of a bombshell that connects the dots to Barack Obama and the Tea Party caucus during the campaign? We know that the Obama Justice Department, once he was president, ignored the outrage and the voter intimidation that happened, but there was some history during the campaign with Barack Obama and the Black Panthers. Please explain that.
Well, this is one of the things in the book that's gotten a lot of attention because I have a photograph in the book of Barack Obama marching in Selma, Alabama, and behind him you could see Malik Zulu Shabazz, who is the head of the new Black Panther Party. Actually, it was also the defendant. He was the defendant in the very same voter intimidation case a couple of years later that was dismissed. And the new Black Panthers are behind candidate Obama, marching at a civil rights march in Selma with their hands raised up above his head in a Black Power salute. But that's not the only connection they had in Selma that day. They spoke from the same podium, and perhaps most importantly, the Black Panthers came to Selma specifically to support candidate Obama. This was very early in his campaign when he really did not have a lot of African-American support. And I describe in detail the events of Selma, so readers, if they want to know more about what actually happened between Obama and the new Black Panthers, they could read about it in Injustice.
Yeah, but please do, because it is an outrage, and you certainly, I mean, is there any doubt in your mind that basically, whether it was tacitly, whether it was wink, wink, nod, nod, however it was, that there is ideological support of Barack Obama and the Black Panther movement, as you talk about from the campaign and tell the story that the media is largely ignoring, and what happened with their decision not to prosecute?
Well, there are some things we know for sure. We know for sure that the Black Panthers came to Selma to publicly support candidate Obama. What we also know is that the media hasn't asked any questions about this in the last 5 years. My book is when Injustice was published last week, it was the very first time since 2007 that anybody has reported on Barack Obama and the new Black Panthers in the same place and the support of the Black Panthers for the campaign. So we know that the media has dropped the ball, and they continue to drop the ball. And we also know if this had been George Bush and the KKK, they would have run out of ink at the New York Times talking about it.
Hold that thought. More when we continue with our guest, the author of a great book, Injustice, exposing the racial agenda of the Obama Justice Department, J. Christian Adams. Rob and I will continue the conversation after this timeout. Don't go away.
Welcome back, Scott Henning Show. I'm Rob Porch, sitting in. We're interviewing our guest, former Justice Department attorney J. Christian Adams. He's the author of a great new book. It's called Injustice, exposing the racial agenda of the Obama Justice Department. And we've been talking about this book, and one of the things in this book, obviously, what kicked a lot of this off, and I remember this from Election Day, is watching the Black Panthers out in front of that polling place, frankly intimidating voters. They had a nightclub or a billy club there or something, and the fact that went unprosecuted and the charges were dropped and that was shocking. That, of course, was the genesis for a lot of what you're doing. And I guess my question for you is how worried do voters need to be? Because we're going into another election cycle. It's obviously going to be contentious, as all election cycles are. How worried do we need to be that our election laws are going to be enforced in this country?
Well, you need to be very worried, and I describe reason after reason in the book. Let me just give you two. Number one, I have photographs in the book that were taken just a few months ago inside the Justice Department, inside the offices of the people who will be enforcing federal election laws next year. The purportedly non-biased civil servants actually have Obama campaign posters hanging on the walls inside their offices, inside the Justice Department. These are the people who will be enforcing the election laws next year. Secondly, I talk in the book about how they do not want to enforce the laws that require states to remove dead, ineligible felons, people who have moved off of the voter rolls. There's a federal law that requires states to do that, and if they don't, the Justice Department voting section is supposed to fix it. Well, the problem is that this Justice Department has exhibited an explicit unwillingness to enforce this provision of law, which means in next year's elections there's likely to be scores of illegitimate votes cast. And so these are very troubling things. I talk about more in the book, but that just gives you a taste of at least two.
Let me. You say the Justice Department has been politicized. Is there other areas that have been politicized too? I mean, obviously this is a big one. But out here in North Dakota, one of the things that we're contending with is we have our local U.S. attorney prosecuting oil companies over dead birds under the Migratory Birds Treaty Act. Some of these birds, they're not even rare. They're like ducks and mallards and things like that, not even rare birds. And some of these companies are getting prosecuted for one bird. Meanwhile, we read news reports about windmills out in California killing endangered eagles and things like that. I mean, that's sort of a double standard. That's exactly the sort of politicization that you're talking about, right?
Yeah, it's all throughout the department. There's been politicization. I mean, they're prosecuting a man in Idaho who shot a grizzly bear that was on his property when his children were outside. We have lots of stories like that, but what I talk about in the book is how the Civil Rights Division, this very powerful part of the department, has actually become radicalized. It would be great if it was merely politicized, but it's become radicalized with crazy policies, crazy lawsuits that make the bird issue in North Dakota look small.
Give us some more examples, because obviously we've gone through and we have the lack of prosecution for the Black Panthers. We have the lack of enforcement of laws requiring that invalid voters, dead voters, and things like that be expunged from the rolls. What other examples do we have out there?
Well, we have the transvestite children case that I talk about in the book. In New York State, some children, 14, 15-year-olds, decided that they weren't sure about their gender, so they started coming to school in mini skirts, and these are boys, by the way, mini skirts and high heels and pink wigs. And the school said, guys, you can't dress like this. Well, the Justice Department actually filed a lawsuit against the school for failing to accommodate these child transvestites. It's in the book. You can read all about it. That's one example. Another one is school discipline. The Justice Department is claiming that school discipline is racially discriminatory, that if black boys, for example, this is a quote from the Assistant Attorney General, if black boys account for 9% of the nation's student population but comprise 24% of students suspended and 30% of students expelled, that means they're being discriminated against. This is an outrageous position that flies in the face of personal responsibility. The transvestite children lawsuit and the school discipline one, those are just two of example after example I described in the book Injustice.
Let me ask you another question. I wanted to switch gears here a little bit. Another big Justice Department scandal is this Fast and Furious investigation. How do you see that playing out? Does that rise to the level of us maybe getting a new attorney general, do you think? I mean, is that something that could ultimately bring down Eric Holder, who I think is at root of a lot of the issues that you're talking about?
Well, he may well do that, and I think that we've seen in Fast and Furious, as well as the new Black Panther case, that this Justice Department has a disconnect with the truth. And in Fast and Furious, it's really coming out. However, I would temper your expectations because it's like whack-a-mole. Even if Holder goes, there's going to be another one that pops up just as radical as he is. So the whole department, as I show in the book, from root to branch, is infested right now with not just politicized people, but radicals. And it's not the Clinton Justice Department. I long for the days of Janet Reno, as you will too if you read this book, because these are not your grandfather's Democrats that are in charge.
Well, how do we stop this? I mean, obviously, is this just something we're going to have to worry about, that if we elect a certain type of person, this is what we're going to get out of our Justice Department? Are there any reforms we can put in place to protect us, to keep this from happening, regardless of who happens to be in office?
Well, the House obviously has oversight power now, and they're doing a fairly good job of investigating issues like Darrell Issa, the chairman of the Oversight Committee. But unfortunately, there really is no short-term solution. I mean, you can't really fix this without a new president. I mean, if you had Bill Clinton, things would be better. But this is a president and an administration that has no problem with transvestite child lawsuits, has no problem with forcing New York to hire people who failed the police exam. So you really have an ideologically driven policy that's not going to change until the ideology is not there.
So, I guess that's what's bothering me. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how else we address this. I mean, because we constantly have to worry if we get the right president in and he's got the right sort of cooperation for Congress. It seems like they've got a lot of power to just trample us.
Well, that's right. And don't forget, elections have consequences. I mean, when you elect people who are ideologically motivated, like these folks are, you get ideological policies. I mean, the last chapter of the book, I describe solutions, and the most important one is to have people in office that have courage to deal with these issues head on, that don't run away just because you start talking about race or race-based preferences or these sorts of issues. You have to have people who understand the issues and are willing to fight over what's right and what's constitutional.
Right, and, I think most of us don't consider a Black Panther member standing out in front of a voting place at the Billy Club to be that controversial an issue. I mean, that's not a Republican versus Democrat issue or anything like that. That's an American issue. We don't do that sort of thing in America.
Well, that's exactly right. When people go to vote, they don't expect armed, uniformed thugs in front of a polling place. And I'm telling you, I believe that even during the Clinton administration, that case would have been brought to the end as it should have been. But these are not, like I said, these are not Bill Clinton Democrats in charge now.
Our guest, J. Christian Adams, author of Injustice, Exposing the Racial Agenda of the Obama Justice Department. Thank you for your time, Mr. Adams. Yanni Myrdal for the North Dakota Tea Party Caucus. Up next, I'm Rob Port, sitting in for Scott.